So guys, as they're giving or as they're passing the bags, why don't you open up to Daniel chapter 3? Now, as you're opening up there, I want to kind of hit on something real quick. Part of the reason, and if you haven't been here, we're preaching through Daniel. The last couple of weeks I've kind of given introductions to Daniel, and so if you need to go back and if you heard those, go back and listen to those. It'll be helpful. I'm not going to go over all that again, but again, we're preaching through Daniel, which is when the people of Israel are in exile, and even while they're in exile, God is still being faithful. And they're in exile because of their sin and because of them not faithfully reflecting God to the nations. But part of the reason why I wanted to preach through Daniel is because of the upcoming political season. Okay, and I'm thankful here, and just kind of to give a caveat as we're getting started. I'm thankful for our government. I'm thankful for how America is put together in general. All right, I like the fact that we can worship together. The fact that we're able to gather. I love a lot of the freedoms that we have. In general, I think there are a lot of things that we could be thankful for that other countries don't have. Now, our government doesn't always work as it should, but generally it is far better than a lot of other things. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that we get to vote. And there are things that are very frustrating, but I'm still thankful that we get to be a part of that. Even if it's a mess, it's a better mess at times. Okay. And I like politics. Okay. I like being engaged. I have podcasts that I listen to. I even listen to some of the Supreme Court stuff going, I stay up to data cases and things like that. I like to be engaged in some of these things. I read news and I try to be politically informed as I possibly can on policies and issues. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think we should be engaged. Okay. I think we should, participate, even like when you look at when in Jeremiah, when God is telling Israel and God is sending them into exile, he does say, listen, like engage with what's going on, be a blessing to the nation that you're a part of, marry and be married, flourish and bring fruitfulness to the country that I have put you in. Okay. And that's the exile that Daniel's currently in. And I think that still applies to us today. We should be engaged in the things that God has called us to. And I think the gospel and God's word calls us to do the best that we can when we engage politically. Okay. At the same time, I think over the last 2 rounds of our presidential election as believers, we did a very poor job of engaging in politics. And I don't think we represented Christ very well. I know, at least for me, that there were times when I got angry with people who I never should have been angry at. And I know that I had arguments with people in a way that was not glorifying and honoring to the Lord. And there were times I thought that I might lose friendship and fellowship with other believers because of these conversations. And, I think we should be engaged. I think that we should understand what, take time and study and grow. But I think there were a lot of times that we did not reflect God very well to the world around us. And we need to take time to understand why. We need to take time to understand what brought us to that. And I think 2 of the main reasons why our view is distorted is because of fear and because of worship. Because of fear and because of worship. We fear what might become of our country. Every election is an existential threat. Is that right? Right? That's the kind of right term, right? Yeah. It's access to what we believe. And a lot of times we get heated in politics because we're afraid. Because we're afraid. But it only happens because we forget how powerful God is. We live in fear because we forget that God's in control. We engage in politics in fear, and we engage with one another in fear because we forget that God's the one who moves nations. And Daniel reminds us of God's power over kingdoms and kings. In Daniel, God reminds us that he has power, and we're going to be getting that at the end of the second half of the book of Daniel, that he has power over history. He knows what's coming and going. He predicted it. And we forget that. And so we operate in fear. But two, we also operate in worship. We worship politics. We were talking about the golden idol that Nebuchadnezzar made. And you want to know one of the greatest idols, golden idols of our age today? Politics. We think it can bring us salvation. We like our comforts. We like our views. And again, there's a lot of things I think we should be politically engaged. I think we should understand, but we can't worship politics. We can't worship elections. When we come to politicians, when we come to the things that this world, and if you look around, like our world views it this way, our country views it this way. Like politics is salvation. That's why if people don't win, if people don't get this, whatever side you come from, if they don't get what they think they need, it's like killing off their God. It is persecution. If we attach our worship to our politics, when our politics is attacked, we're persecuted for our faith. That should never be the case. Not for politics. We shouldn't feel persecuted for our politics in the sense of worship. When we worship politicians, we worship the things that we believe. Now, so this sermon, as we look at, even as we go through the book of Daniel, and specifically Daniel chapter 3 right here, I'm not preaching on this is how you should vote. This is how you should do it. No, I'm not going to do that right now. Okay, I'm not going to do it. What I am doing is this is how Christians need to be as we approach. This is, if we're going to do this right and healthy, we need to understand how big God is, and we need to understand that we worship God alone. And once those two things are right, we can approach politics right. We can approach other issues in this world right. But it starts with understanding how big and powerful God is, and comes being full. That's why we worship God, being full of our worship of God, so we don't have to get in anywhere else. And when we understand the kingdom of God first and foremost, and then we can engage rightly with the things of this world. That make sense, church? So my big idea this morning, as we look into Daniel chapter 3, even when nations reject God, he is faithful and in control. Even when nations reject God, he is faithful and in control. Now, as we're jumping into Daniel chapter 3, one thing to remember, last week we looked at Daniel chapter 2, which was Daniel interpreting the dream for Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, again, he's this guy who's like super excited and then rage and crazy, and he's this ruler of the greatest nation in the world, but he's brought to his knees by a dream, and like he tries to get his magicians and Chaldeans and all of those people to interpret his dream and to tell him his dream, and they can't do it, and he loses his mind and commands all of them to be killed. And then finally Daniel says, no, I can do that. Well, I can't, but God can. And he goes to God and they pray, and God gives him the dream and the vision. He goes and interprets it. And in the dream, we remember what was in the dream. Anyone remember? What was it? The four kingdoms. But what was it? What presented the four kingdoms? Remember? Yeah, the statue. The bronze was the bottom. No, the bronze was the bronze the bottom. The bronze was the middle part. The iron. There was gold. What was the second one? Silver. Gold, silver, bronze, iron, and then clay and iron. I think that's what it was. And so it was this statue. Okay, and the top part was gold, right? And what was that? What was that representing? Babylon. It was Babylon. It was King Nebuchadnezzar's empire. Okay, so we got to remember that. Okay, he just had this dream. God told him, and then God told him the next, the several coming. Like it literally, Jerry texted me later. It was 904 years from when the dream first predicted to when the dream ended. So 904 years of empires, 4 different empires that this dream predicted. But at the top was King Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, and it was gold. Okay, and he was the ruler overall. And remember, God told through Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar, that this was the kingdom that God gave you. But now we start in chapter 3, okay? And I think Nebuchadnezzar takes that dream a little bit too far. And let's see if you can pick up on it when we go in there. So it says, starting in verse 1, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. Seems kind of ironic where he just got done seeing this big image in his dreams of the head of gold, but instead of thanking God for giving him this kingdom and being satisfied, he makes a whole image. And I want you to pay attention, okay? How many times it says in this passage, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. Okay, it's almost comical. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and his breadth 6 cubits. Again, 60 cubits versus 6 cubits. It was probably like on a pedestal, because like 60 cubits is really tall versus 6 cubits. And so this is like be a super, kind of like Tim, maybe a tall, lanky guy, but even taller. So it was probably up on a little bit of a pedestal, but it was pretty massive, overlaid with gold. Okay, this is whose height was 60 cubits and a breadth 6 cubits. And he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So kind of out in a place where people could gather and worship. And this is the King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the straps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justice, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to dedicate the image that King Nebuchadnezzar set up twice. Okay, now another thing. There's a ton of repeats of different things in there. One of them is all the people who are there. Okay, if you look at other sections of Daniel, he goes through the first time, he goes to the list, like he'll talk about the Chaldeans, and who all the Chaldeans are, and then the rest of the chapter, he goes and he takes that and he narrows it down to just the Chaldeans. So he says all of these people and then them. But in this chapter, he literally reiterates all these groups of people multiple times. Why? Because he's showing that this is important. He's showing, like Daniel's pointing out that all of these really important people are there. And he goes through it multiple times. Okay, verse 3. Then the straps, prefects. So he just got done saying who's all there. Verse 2, verse 3. Then the straps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, the officials of the province gathered for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. 3. 2 times all the people there. And they stood up before the image of Nebuchadnezzar that had set up. 4. And the herald proclaimed, "You are commanded, O people in nations and languages." Okay, that O people, nations, and languages. Not only is this for all the straps, precepts, all those other guys, but King Nebuchadnezzar had taken over the known world. And what he is doing right now is he's saying, listen, I don't think this was an image of Nebuchadnezzar. I think it was an image that maybe represented the image of his dream, but also represented the gods of the Babylonians. And what he is doing is he is bringing this, and he is now saying, because he has conquered the known world to some extent, that now all of the nations are going to worship the Babylonian gods. This is telling the other nations that we are becoming, or our gods are becoming your gods. The Babylonian gods are the gods of the nations. Now, do you remember what Israel was supposed to do? Why they were chosen people? Anybody? Why was Israel the chosen people? What was one of their things they were, one of the main jobs that they were supposed to do? What? To worship God only, and why? To be set apart, to show the nations the glory of God. Like that was what Israel was supposed to do. They were supposed to worship God alone, to be set apart so that they could display the glory of God to the nations, so that the nations could see that. And so here, basically, King Nebuchadnezzar is saying, no, I'm going to do that myself. He's taking the place of Israel. He's saying, listen, oh, people, the nations and languages, this is your God. That when you hear the sound of the horn, and here's another list of bunch of things. When you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon. What's a trigon? Anybody know what that is? Actually, I should look that up. Huh? Can somebody play that for Matt? Can we play that next week in worship? Can you figure out what that is and then come back and play in worship for us? The trigon, the harp, the bagpipe. I would like a bagpipe. And every kind of music. You are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar 5 has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, As soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, the bagpipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the people of the nations and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar VI had set up. I have 2 points this morning. And the first one is that our world is going to set itself up against God. Our world is going to set itself up against God. Even when God has shown himself to be faithful time and again, both to Israel and to Gentile nations, they still choose to reject God and set themselves up against him and anyone who follows him. And here, that's exactly what we're seeing with King Nebuchadnezzar. King Nebuchadnezzar, took over. He was given, God blessed him to bring the wrath of God onto the nation of Israel. King Nebuchadnezzar took Israel into exile, probably 3 different times, actually. And, and even through the dream that we looked at in Daniel chapter 2, there was some realization on King Nebuchadnezzar's part that this was from God. And he even acknowledged that. He even worshiped, at the end of, after chapter 2, he even worshiped God to some extent and realized that God was in this. But at the same time, that wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough for King Nebuchadnezzar. And as we look back, it wasn't good enough for Israel either. Israel was given everything that they needed to be able to be a nation that was set apart, that worshiped God alone, that a nation that had the very presence of God through the temple and the tabernacle and all the laws and all of that allowed God's presence to dwell among them, and it wasn't good enough. I mean, that's the whole story of God being faithful and Israel failing, and God being faithful and Israel failing and setting themselves up against God. So it shouldn't surprise us that that's the rest of the world as well. King Nebuchadnezzar makes his golden image. He takes that dream and makes it grander. It's 90 feet tall by 9 feet wide. It seems like he wanted to go beyond what God had given him. God had said this is the head and the shoulders, but he's trying to make this image that is much bigger. This was most likely a tribute, taking, like I said before, taking all of the other nations and saying, listen, now these are your gods. But it was an image that King Nebuchadnezzar himself had set up. This was not set up by God. This was not in glory and worship of God. King Nebuchadnezzar himself. But not only that, but King Nebuchadnezzar wanted to make this a big deal. That's why when you go back, that's why all the instruments are listed multiple times. This was a big band production. This was a huge dedication. This was all the nations of all the people coming to worship this golden image. And there's this huge band set up. And not only that, but it is all of the Babylon proper, all of the leaders, like he goes on, that's why he says it multiple times, that these are the head honchos of Babylon. This was the who's who of Babylon coming to worship this king, or coming to worship this image that the king has set up. On top of that, there's significant ramifications. Not only are they called to worship, but if they don't, they're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace. Death is the penalty. Now, that the fiery furnace was probably the smelting, what they used to burn down the gold. And so it was probably this big, it's probably set up on a hill with a hole in the top and maybe 2 holes in the side. And so they would build a fire in there in the bottom, and then you would dump the gold into the top, or you put the gold in the top, and then it would melt. Okay, but then you could see things probably from 2 to 3 spots below, and so because you'd watch it, and then as the fire would die down, you'd bring it out, and then you would go put it, put on the image or whatever. And so, but the Nebuchadnezzar's threatening to literally throw you in the top of this thing, and it was probably close to where the image was, because that's, if they were melting gold to make this thing gold. And so everybody could see it. Like, this was a death threat in front of everyone. This was basically a public execution in front of the who's who of Babylon. Okay? This is all the people and nations and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar set up. Then it goes on. Look at verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. This wasn't just about worshiping the image of God, but the world hates God and God's people. The world hates God's chosen one. In fact, there have been multiple times we can see throughout history where God or where Satan has tried to wipe out and persecute God's own people. And here the Chaldeans came maliciously against the Jews, the people that were supposed to be set apart, that didn't worship any gods. This was a religious hate crime. And there they declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made the decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship this golden image. You, O king, you made this proclamation. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the burning fiery furnace." O king, there are certain Jews who you have appointed over the affairs of Babylon. You can just kind of feel them ribbing. The Chaldeans, they didn't like the fact that the Jews were in the court of the Babylonians. This was an affront to them. The fact that Daniel was able to interpret the dream and they could not. The fact that they were alive because Daniel's God did something they couldn't, probably, even though they were alive, still ribbed them and made them. They were under the authority of these exiled Jewish people. O king, these Jews that you put in charge, you see now they're not worshiping. Certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Here we go again. Nebuchadnezzar was a high and low dude. Then King Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage. How often did we see that last political season? A furious rage commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought, so they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up?" 7, 8. Thanks, Shaden. Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of musician, fall down and worship the image that I have made. 9, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. Who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Here, King Nebuchadnezzar sets himself up deliberately against God. He doesn't realize it. He's talking about the God. He's a small g God here, but really he's setting himself up against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And even this point, we're going to go on in a second here. We're going to see, I'm going to tell you a little secret here. But they get thrown in a furious rage. They're about to get thrown into this fiery furnace. Because King Nebuchadnezzar and the Chaldeans set themselves up against God. This feels, especially for the three boys, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the boys, this feels like a terrible moment. And their literal lives are in danger. God allowed it. God allowed it. God allowed these people to set themselves up against him. And that's been the case throughout all history. God allows these moments so that it feels like everything is broken, everything is falling apart, that the whole world is fighting. I mean, you remember Elijah, okay, in 2 Kings, when Queen Jezebel and King Ahab, they're bad king and queen. and they worshiped. They were king and queen of Israel. They worshipped and false gods, and it was all that. And Elijah, went up on the mountaintop, and he kind of had the battle with the prophets of Baal, and they called down all the fiery, they were supposed to call down the fire on their altar, and they sacrificed, and they cut themselves, and they did all these things, and nothing happened. And nothing happened. And then Elijah, when he was fighting against them, put water. I think it was 12, if I'm not correct. I might not be correct. I think it was 12 things of water, and they poured it all over, and just to show, everything was wet, and shouldn't have started on fire. Okay, that shouldn't have happened. And you remember what happened when Elijah prayed to God? Can you imagine being on that mountaintop? Like, it would be like, what? And then God brings rain. It hadn't rained for like 5 years or 6 years or 3 years or whatever it was. I don't remember. I have to go back and look yet. But, God brings rain, and like it's crazy, and all these things happen. And then you know what happens to Elijah after that? And then he outruns. Oh, I forgot about that too. Then he outruns, Queen Jezebel. She's in a chariot. Because like literally he becomes a living flash. Whoa! God. Okay? You know what happens to Elijah after that? He gets depressed and wants to die. Why? Because he feels like everyone's against him. Like he feels like everything's been set up. He feels like the whole world has set themselves up against God, and it's going to fail. And you know what God, well, first, I love this part. Okay. Wait till this. I'm totally going off my tangent right now. You want to know what God does with Elijah before he ever actually encourages him or does anything to him? You know what he tells him to do? Go to sleep and eat some food. Go sleep for like 4 days, and here is some supernatural food. Then, I love it. Go to sleep, get some rest, eat some good food, calm down. Let's get you in the right space, and now let's talk. And then you want to know what he tells him? No, I've actually saved 7,000 people, 7,000 priests and prophets. That's not the case, Elijah. That's not the case. But if you look through all of history, Abraham had to wait for years to have his son. It felt like everything was falling apart. Joseph was supposed to, Joseph and the sons of Jacob, they sold Joseph into slavery. He was living in the pit of despair. He was supposed to be, one of the leaders of the tribe of Israel. Israel ends up being slaves to Egypt. Okay, not only that, but then Egypt, when they get out, they're gonna, they were able to run away and get away, and God did all the things in the 10 plagues, all that, and they get up to the Red Sea, and they're gonna die. Because a king, a Pharaoh, stood up against God. Who's the next? David. Let's talk about David. David was anointed king and had to flee from the king of Israel for years. Let me go on and on. But here's the thing, our world sets itself up against God all the time. This has been the story from the beginning of creation. We shouldn't be surprised by it. But it also doesn't mean that God has lost control either. God allows these moments. God allows these moments because his story is a story of the great reversal. His story is the story of when everything looks like it's going to fall apart. His power, his majesty, his glory is far greater than we could ever imagine. Daniel 3 is a story not about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And there's a lot of good things, and I'm going to get back to them in a second, that we can learn about them. But Daniel chapter 3 is a story about God. It's a story about God and his power over the nations. His story that even when his chosen nation chose to reject him and went off into exile, he was still choosing to care for and bless his nation. He still had power and authority. He's literally playing with King Nebuchadnezzar. But not only that, he knew the next 4 empires and kingdoms to come. We saw that in chapter 2. We're going to see it again in chapter 7. I'm going to give you a spoiler. But, And here we see God's power. And church, if you and I are going to operate in this life right, understanding what it means to be in this kingdom, we need to understand that even as dark as this kingdom gets, God is still in control. God has power over it. We have absolutely nothing to fear. Even when every nation, tribe, and tongue sets itself up against kings and governments. I mean, think about every good action movie, okay? Every good action movie has some sort of evil that sets itself up against what is true and good. Why? It's in our nature. Like, we understand that even in our own, like, our own creation. So why? Because God uses those moments to show his glory. God uses, my second point, God uses those moments to show his glory. All right, look what happens. What do I end on? Let's go to verse 16. After he talks about what God's going to deliver you out of my hand. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king. Okay, take note, difference. The Chaldeans. Oh, king, may you live forever. Oh, Lord. And they're kind of manipulating. And your Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to say, oh, Nebuchadnezzar. Oh, they're right from the very beginning. They're showing how little power he really has over them. We have no need to answer you in this matter. Man, that answer is complete trust in the sovereign control of God. If this be so, our God, who we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve you or your gods or worship the golden image 10 that you have set up. Here's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When King Nebuchadnezzar challenges, who is this God that's going to deliver you out of my hand? And Shadrach, Meshach, we don't have to answer you because we trust God far more than we trust you. And our God, he has every ability to deliver us from the fiery furnace. But we do know whether we live or whether we die, he is going to deliver us out of your hand because you don't have control over our eternity. You don't have, and even if he doesn't take us out of this fiery furnace, King Nebuchadnezzar, we're not going to worship your God or your image. We're not going to bow down because we know that God is going to deliver us out of your hand, even in death. And this is just an awesome display of trusting in God's sovereignty. God, you can deliver me from this situation. You can deliver me from this fiery furnace. But even if you don't, you will deliver me from the hand of evil because we know even after death, resurrection is coming. And so we're not going to worship the golden images of this world. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Can you guys say those out of order? Anybody ever try to say those out of order? It's so confused. We've said it in that order since we've been little kids. So trying to say it out of order is like just totally, I don't know why I thought of that, but. Full trust in God's sovereignty. Verse 19, the Nebuchadnezzar filled with fury again. And the again, this guy's just like controlled with rage and anger. Like this, the fact that they wouldn't bow down to his image, the image that he put up, filled them with fury again and again. They were setting themselves. He so held to this idea that if people didn't bow down to this image, it was a rejection of him. If they didn't sign on to his idolatry, they were rejecting him, and they're going to burn. Pretty intense, huh? Yeah. He was filled with fury. The expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter, as hot as it could go, basically. than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men. He took his mightiest men and had Shadrach, Meshach, these guys who were over areas of Babylon. He had them bound like slaves and cast them into the fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks and tunics. They didn't even like have time to change or do anything. They bound like this is a fury of rage and anger. And they bound them, and these men took them up, and they were thrown into there was no discussion. There was no time to deal with this. They had one moment where they trusted in God's sovereignty, and then they were wiped away. Could you imagine being Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego right now? God, we trusted you, and now they're being thrown in. All right, God, we're on the edge. Come on, do something. And look at this, okay? Because the king's order, verse 22, was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The mighty men. I mean, did you think about the fury of this guy? He is so psychotic and so attached to what is going on. I mean, literally, this sounds like all of our politicians sometimes. Okay? And he was so consumed by these things that he got angry. He threw a hissy fit. He had them bound. They were brought up. This fire was brought up. His mighty men died. This whole situation seems like it's out of control. Like God has forgotten. Yeah, I think they did get thrown in. It's a good question, John. No, I think they got thrown in. And again, remember, it probably was a furnace where people could see in kind of on the side of the hill where you would be brought up and thrown in, and you could see, from the sides where you would build the fire. And so they were brought up, and the furnace was stoked from below. And as they were up there, when that furnace was stoked, that's what probably consumed the guards. And as that happened, not Nebuchadnezzar, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell into the fiery furnace. They went in. They got dropped. And they could see, and they were watching this thing happen. And they were waiting. They were waiting for the death of these guys. Not because they were outside. Remember, the fire was up top. Those are good questions, though. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. And he declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" And they answered and said to the king, "True, O king." And he answered, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is the son of looks like the son of the gods." Close. He's almost right. Use some capitals and take off the S at the end. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace and declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants." Finally, there's some right recognition. Servants of the Most High God. This is the first time that Nebuchadnezzar put God above other gods as the highest God. I still don't think he fully understands. When Jerry's preaching next week, I think we'll understand why, but he's starting to. Servants of the Most High God, come out of here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. Now here again, look at verse 27. And the straps, the prefects, the governors, the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of these men. All of these men, all of these great men and women, and all these this great crowd, the who's who of Babylon, who were coming to worship a golden image set up by King Nebuchadnezzar as a way of shaking their fists at God and creating the gods of the nation. They were coming to dedicate this God. They're now watching Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walk out of this fire, walk out of this furnace that just consumed Nebuchadnezzar's mighty men. The peoples of Babylon are seeing the glory of God. the hair. Okay, listen to me. I sit around campfires all the time. Okay, I love campfires. And I will do just about anything to have one. The moment I sit around a campfire, I come inside and sit down next to Ashley. She can't smell it. Like her nose, like not great. Okay. But the moment that I sit down, sitting by a campfire, she knows it immediately. Okay. You smell like a campfire. Okay. It literally takes like 2 seconds. I could be lighting the kindling and it could have touched like the palm of my hand, and that's enough. But here, this is their hair was not singed, their clothes were not harmed. The snow smell of the fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered them, blessed be the glory of God. He's worshiping God. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies. They were ready to die rather than worship and serve any God except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be, this guy is so drastic, shall be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Now think about this, okay? Think about this. Okay. This was meant to be a dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar set up. It was a rejection of all other gods. It was setting up King Nebuchadnezzar's God that he made. It was showing his power and authority. He was bringing everybody of who's who was coming in. They were having this huge band. And even the Chaldeans who hated the Jews were going to use this to wipe off the people that they despised. They were killing off the three of the three of these guys who were set over them that they hated because of their worship of God. This was a direct rebellion against God. But look how it ended up. Look at how it ended up. All of these counselors and all of these, people who had power and authority, they saw God's glory on display. Instead of seeing this crazy, image on display, that was forgotten. By the end of this, King Nebuchadnezzar's image is nowhere. They're watching God's faithful servants. They're seeing God's powerful hand. 2, this was meant to be a celebration of these Jews being wiped out who faithfully followed God. But instead, at the end, Nebuchadnezzar is commanded that anybody who even speaks against their God are going to be torn limb from limb. He was, first off, saying anyone who doesn't worship this image is going to be thrown into a fiery furnace. And then we get to the other side over here, and now the ones who speak against God are going to be torn limb from limb. Not only that, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were going to die, now have a greater authority in the kingdom. The king, who was starting to humble himself, getting arrogant, humbled himself and worshiped God even more. The great reversal. This is the story of God. You want to know something crazy? You want to also see this story? In the gospel of Jesus Christ. In the gospel of Jesus Christ. You know Satan's probably one of Satan's greatest moments? That moment when Jesus said, "It is finished." Satan thought he had won. God was killed. One of our greatest moments of all history is when God said it was finished. When God took our punishment. That was one of the best and worst moments in all of history. But that's always been God's story. God shows his glory and his love and his care for us when when we see destruction and suffering at its greatest, and then he gives us himself time and time again. And that's the very story of the gospel. When Jesus showed up and took our place on the cross, but instead changes everything. But instead of Satan ruling and Satan having his dominion of darkness, now there have been people who have been brought from death to life. There have been people who have gone from being, like, when it was just the God of the nation of Israel, is now the God of all nations. The King of the universe has become our mediator. We should respond just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's kind of as we end here. How do we respond to something that's, we worship God and nothing else? We worship God and nothing else. We see a story like this, the story of the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, story of Daniel chapter 3. Two things, as I was talking about, are evident. One, and the main thing I want you to walk away with is that this is a display of God's power and glory. This is not a story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This is a story of God showing his power over kings and nations. And, then we talk about getting set up, getting our hearts and our minds ready for political seasons and for us to engage rightly. Okay, you want to overcome fear and not engage with other people in fear. Man, that comes from seeing who God is. Seeing God take the worst and bring about the best. We don't have to fear. I mean, literally, God took 2 or 3 men falling into a fiery furnace because they worshiped him and glorified himself through it. God can take out any nation and kingdom. God is not bound by how we're bound. We don't have to live in fear. We can engage. We can be a part of what is going on in the world around us, but we know that heaven is coming. Our kingdom is secure. Our king will not lose. He already died and walked out of the grave. And so it's the story of a God who is in control. But there's a side story here, and that is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And that is their faithfulness. And as we look at the story of who God is, we should understand that there is a response to that, and that is to worship him and him alone. You want to engage with the things in the world around us, right? Well, that starts with worshiping God over anything else. And I'm going to tell you this right now, I think politics is one of our golden images. We have comfort. We have, money, power. But I think politics is something that incorporates all of those things. It's something that we struggle with. And so if we're going to engage with it right, before we ever engage with it, we need to worship God rightly. Our hearts and our minds need to be filled with the worship of him. When we see his glory, our response is to fall on our face and worship nothing else. But that does take effort on our part. It takes time to look at what are the things that I do worship. What are the things that I've let slip into my life where I'm not being steadfast like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? What are for me, a lot of times, comfort. I worship comfort more than I don't want to be inconvenienced. I don't want to have difficulty in this life. I mean, how much time and energy I give to comfort is ridiculous. That's a God. That's an image I worship. But if I'm going to be able to enjoy that right, God, do you want to know something crazy? Comfort's a blessing from the Lord. Rest is a blessing from the Lord. But you want to know how I use that right? By learning to worship God more deeply. And then I can understand that in a correct way. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got it right. Like, listen, nothing else matters. Anything can happen to me, and God is still going to be victorious. God has every ability to save me from this. I'm not going to worship anything else. And here's the thing, okay, church? Here's the last thing I'm going to close. We can pray and sing, but the greatest thing is that we can continually confess these to God without fear of judgment because Christ died in our place. The greatest reversal that ever happened was Jesus Christ. And so every time that we worship a false God, we can turn to God and repent. And then we can praise and worship again and again and again. Every time, because of the great reversal. Every time. So we need to continually kill our idols. We need to continually see how big God is. We need to fear nothing else other than God and allow that to direct our hearts and our minds to the Lord. And then as we take time to sing these songs, just ask God, in what ways am I not making you king of my life? What are the idols of my life? What am I worshiping? And then confess and worship again. And confess and worship again. And at the end of all of this is perfect rest and perfect peace in God's eternal kingdom. And we'll do nothing but worship God and delight and find joy in him. Amen. God, we come before you. Lord, we're just thankful for this time. And God, we're thankful for the reminder that we can worship you alone. God, that you are sovereign over all. Lord, we thank you that we don't have to fear. God, we don't have to live and worry. But God, that we can trust in you. God, we thank you that you allow us to engage in this life, that you allow us to participate in the country that you've put us in. God, you've given us rest, God, you've given us comfort. Lord, that we can eat and enjoy food. Lord, that we can enjoy entertainment. We can enjoy fellowship. And God, there's so many things that you've given us that we could be grateful that we could be a part of. But God, before we ever turn to those things, Lord, I pray that we would see you for who you are. God, you are big and glorious, God. That you are the mover and shaker of nations and kings, that there is nothing that stands in the way. Lord, even the biggest issues, God, whether it be marriages, God, whether it be our job or our children, God, whether it be just the difficulty of a situation that it just feels like a rock that cannot be moved, Lord, that is causing fear and depression and anxiety, that's causing, Lord, renew our faith that you can move in that again. And God, let's understand that there are times when you allow people to stand against you and things to stand against you so you can show your glory. But God, that in your time, you are going to move. And so even in the midst of that, Lord, I pray that you would cause us to trust you again. And God, we would remember that your trust has never been broken, God, and that the ultimate fulfillment of that trust is your Son, Jesus Christ, who died in our place and took our payment. And God, then walked out of that grave so that we can have hope of all eternity. And guys, and as we turn to worship you, Lord, I pray that you would just allow us to confess. God, allow us to hand over the idols, hand over the golden images that we have set up, just like King Nebuchadnezzar has, and worship you again through your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.